The Loom Weaver and the Lost Promise. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story captures your heart, and subscribe to Narratives and Memories so you don't miss our next tale. The sun dawned with a tender blush over Stonehaven Village that morning, as if the heavens themselves knew this would be the most pivotal day in the life of Isabella Thorne. Outside the quaint cottage rented by the bride's parents, lavender blossoms swayed gently in the breeze. Isabella, enveloped in a hand-embroidered white cotton robe gifted by her grandmother, gazed out the window, her eyes brimming with tears of emotion. It wasn't nervousness, it was profound gratitude. In just a few hours, she would become the wife of Daniel Hayes, the man who had transformed her life like an unexpected miracle. Daniel was the heir to a sprawling hotel empire with roots in coastal resorts and a presence spanning London, Paris, and Sydney. Isabella, the daughter of a gardener and a seamstress, was simple, honest, and full of dreams. They met by chance at an artisan fair, where Isabella sold notebooks adorned with recycled fabrics. Captivated by her radiant spirit, Daniel bought them all. He returned the following week, and the next, and the next. A month later, they were sharing ice cream on a park bench, laughing as if the world belonged only to them. Their romance blossomed in secret at first, largely due to the formidable pressure from the Hayes family. To Daniel's parents, this relationship was a direct threat to the company's pristine image. "You are a Hayes, Daniel, and Hayes don't mix with just anyone." He listened, but he did not yield. He swore to Isabella that nothing would separate them. And now, 2 years later, with all the criticisms firmly behind them, they were on the cusp of marrying in an intimate yet profoundly meaningful ceremony. As Isabella prepared with the help of her best friend, Chloe, her emotions overflowed in small, poignant gestures. She caressed her veil as if touching a fragile dream. Memories of difficult times, the moments she thought of giving up, the tears hidden in her pillow when she felt she wasn't enough for him, all seemed to have been worth it. Daniel had chosen her, for love against all odds. All across the village, Daniel stared silently into the mirror. His impeccably tailored navy suit was flawless, but his eyes carried a strange burden. He had received a call hours earlier from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was deep, imposing, chilling. "If you step onto that altar, Isabella will pay a price you can't even imagine." The call abruptly ended, but the chilling threat lingered. He didn't know who it was, but the message was stark. And he, terrified, tried desperately to hold on to his reason. He thought of telling Isabella, of seeking his father's help. But deep down, he knew this threat came from someone far closer than he imagined. It was the kind of warning the Hayes family knew how to deliver without leaving fingerprints. Daniel's father had never accepted Isabella, not once. Now that the wedding was imminent, perhaps he was playing his last card. Daniel took a deep breath. He closed his eyes and recalled their first kiss, the day she taught him to make rice pudding. The moment she first whispered, "I love you," her voice trembling, but her soul completely open. He loved her, but would love be enough to protect her? The empty altar. In the church, guests began to arrive. The atmosphere hummed with anticipation, with hope. Soft music played, and Isabella, now dressed as a bride, walked amidst sighs and emotional gazes. She smiled, but her heart pounded like a drum. "Where's Daniel?" she whispered to Chloe, disguising her anxiety. "He must be on his way. Calm down, sweetie. He's the groom." They're always late. Minutes stretched into half an hour. The appointed time had long passed. Welcome to Narratives and Memories. Before we continue, please give this video a like so YouTube knows our content is valuable and shares it with more people. The silence inside the church was odd, uncomfortable, as if everyone present was caught in the same held breath, waiting for the door to open and the groom to finally enter. Isabella, still behind the altar, couldn't stop looking at Chloe's wristwatch. The hands seemed to mock her with every passing second. "He's coming. Maybe his car broke down, or he got lost in traffic," her friend whispered, trying to remain calm. But her voice already betrayed her fear. When the priest approached from the side door and discreetly asked Chloe to accompany him, something inside Isabella froze. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew, in that exact instant, that something was terribly wrong. Her friend's eyes returned, brimming with tears, and with uncontrollable trembling, Chloe whispered, as if she couldn't utter the words firmly, "Isabella, he's not coming. He sent this." She handed Isabella her phone. Isabella took the device with trembling hands. The message was short, almost cruel. "I can't. Forgive me. Daniel," that was all. No explanation, no apology, no face. The world around her seemed to fade. The flowers lost their scent. The dress, which once carried dreams, now weighed like concrete on her shoulders. She wanted to scream, but couldn't. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't respond. She only felt tears slide slowly, silently, as she stared at the empty altar, the lit candles, and all eyes turning towards her. Whispers began, timid at first, then growing more audible. Did he run away? Did she know? Poor girl. He tricked her. In slow motion, Isabella walked out of the church with faltering steps. Outside, the sky, which had been blue moments before, was now covered with heavy clouds. It was as if the entire universe mourned with her. The photographers, who hours earlier had captured her with enthusiasm, now silently put away their cameras. Even the flowers on the entrance arch seemed wilted. The journey back to her home was made in absolute silence. Chloe didn't say a word, only held her hand. Isabella, still in her veil, sat on the living room sofa like a statue. She didn't cry aloud. She didn't scream. But her eyes said it all. It was that kind of pain that doesn't make a fuss. It makes noise inside, like glass when it shatters. The following hours were a blur. Calls from relatives, messages from shocked friends, visits from those wanting to console her. But nothing made sense. Isabella thought of only one thing. Why? Why would he do this to her? How could someone who claimed to love her destroy her in such a way? The doubt was worse than the abandonment. That night, alone in her room, she put on plain sweatpants and angrily tore off her wedding dress. She threw it into a corner as if shedding a lie. She cried herself to sleep, her dreams broken by visions of Daniel asking for forgiveness, explaining everything. But upon waking, everything returned to the same place, the emptiness. Days later, society newspapers subtly announced, "The union between Daniel Hayes and Isabella Thorne has been canceled due to personal reasons." Personal reasons. Such a cold phrase to justify an emotional tragedy. Isabella knew that to the world, she was just another unfinished story. But for her, it was the end of everything she believed about love. She retreated into silence, and something inside her died that day, a loom of solitude. In the weeks that followed the canceled wedding, time seemed to lose its rhythm. The days were all the same, drawn out, heavy, unbearably silent. Isabella woke up late, with no desire to leave her bed, no strength to open the curtains. Sunlight felt cruel. She preferred the gloom, where she didn't have to face her reflection or the memories scattered throughout the house. Everything still smelled of Daniel. She called him several times, the first day, the second, the third, but all calls went straight to voicemail. With each frustrated attempt, something inside her broke a little more. She wrote him messages, emails, even a handwritten letter, like the ones they used to exchange at the beginning of their courtship. No response. The silence was deafening. Desperate to understand, Isabella decided to go to the Hayes mansion. She knew it was risky, even humiliating, but she needed to hear something, anything. She was greeted by Martha, the housekeeper, who had been kind for years. But that day, her posture was rigid. "Mr. Hayes is not here, and honestly, you shouldn't have come. The family no longer wishes to have any connection." Before Isabella could say anything, the gate closed with a definitive thud. Consumed by a burning anguish in her chest, Isabella tried to speak with Richard Hayes, Daniel's father. He received her in the company office with a paternalistic yet cold air. "You're a pretty young woman, dedicated, but you don't belong in our world, Isabella. Daniel realized it in time. It's best you move on with your life." She felt a knot in her throat, but she stood firm. "Did he tell you something? Is he okay?" Richard just smiled, an empty smile. "The important thing is that he made the right decision, and you should do the same." It was at that moment that Isabella understood the rejection was total. Not only was she without the man she loved, but she was being erased, as if she had never existed in his life. The silence was not an accident. It was a plan. A cruel sentence dictated by those with the power to silence and erase everything. Rumors soon began to circulate. Some said Daniel had eloped with an Argentinian model. Others, that he had been forced to marry the daughter of an influential politician. Isabella tried not to believe anything, but each new piece of gossip was like salt on an open wound. What hurt the most, however, was imagining that he had simply stopped loving her. Chloe insisted that she leave the house, breathe, live again, but Isabella only wanted answers. She couldn't take a step without understanding why she had been discarded, as if their love were something disposable. "What did I do wrong?" she repeated like a painful mantra. "When did he stop loving me?" In the absence of words, Isabella sought refuge in memories. She revisited photos, reread old messages, watched videos where they laughed together on short trips, cooked, exchanged knowing glances. Nothing made sense. That man loved her. She felt it. So why this brutal silence? There was a night when Isabella, sitting on her bedroom floor, surrounded by papers and memories, destroyed everything. Every note, every letter. She only kept one thing, the birthday card where he had written, "I will never leave you, never." She cried, clutching that paper until she fell asleep. The pain wasn't just for a lost love, it was the pain of being forgotten, ignored, silenced, as if her story had been a delusion, as if she herself were a footnote in the life of someone who had sworn eternal love to her. It was that kind of silence that echoes within and slowly begins to kill. A faint beat. It was a cold morning when Isabella noticed something strange in her body. Her period had been weeks late, but she attributed it to stress, sadness, the silent grief consuming her since the abandonment. She was thin, pale, with deep dark circles under her eyes, yet there was something different, a slight dizziness, subtle nausea, an inexplicable fatigue. At first, she denied it with all her strength. It couldn't be. Impossible. Not now, not alone. But with each passing day, the signs became more evident. Chloe noticed it first. "You're different, Isabella. Have you thought about taking a test?" She hesitated. But something within her, a primitive instinct perhaps, led her to the pharmacy that afternoon. The result came quickly, directly, without mercy. 2 lines. Positive. Isabella stood, alone in the bathroom, staring at the test as if it were a sentence. For long minutes, she couldn't react. Then a wave of rage washed over her. She threw the test to the floor. She screamed. She hit the wall hard. Why now? Why me? She spent hours crying, huddled on the sofa. She could barely hold herself up. How was she going to take care of a child? His child. The man who left her stranded at the altar without even looking her in the eye. She thought of not going through with it. She thought of disappearing. But in the dead of night, she placed her hand on her belly and whispered, as if asking forgiveness from someone she hadn't yet met. "Forgive me. I'm just scared." In the following days, something began to change. Slowly. Timidly. It wasn't joy, nor complete acceptance. It was a spark, a thread of purpose, a persistent thought that returned every time despair threatened to take control. If I'm going to have you, I'm going to do it right. Isabella scheduled an appointment with a local midwife, an elderly woman named Mrs. Elena. Hearing the heartbeat for the first time, a hurried, strong sound, Isabella cried. But this time, not from sadness. It was a cry mixed with wonder, relief, instinct. She was no longer alone. Telling her mother was difficult. Mrs. Clara was in shock. "My daughter, a child without a father that is a burden the world exacts a heavy price for." But seeing the firmness in Isabella's eyes, she sighed and hugged her. "And if it's your decision, I'll be with you." And that was enough. Isabella spent the following months between tears and sewing needles. She began making baby clothes, using scraps left over from neighbors' orders. It was as if, with each garment she sewed, she took another step towards acceptance. Her belly grew, and with it, her strength. One day, alone in her room, she wrote in her diary, "Perhaps Daniel will never know you exist. Perhaps he chose to erase us from his life, but I choose you every day, and I will love you for both of us." A new fabric of life. When Isabella stepped off the bus with 2 suitcases, a cloth bag full of fabric scraps, and a still discreet 3-month pregnant belly, she didn't know exactly where she was. She only knew she needed to be far away, far from the city that had witnessed her humiliation, far from the memories that haunted her at every corner, and above all, far from the Hayes name, which resonated in every pitying or curious glance. The small village was called Harmony Valley, a place hidden among mountains and fields of sunflowers, where time seemed to slow down. Here, no one knew her face, no one knew her past. It was exactly what she wanted, to start from scratch, like a blank page. She found refuge in a small house next to the main square, rented for a symbolic price by a widow named Mrs. Rosa. "You have the eyes of a woman who has suffered, but is strong," the old woman said, as she handed her the key. Isabella smiled, her eyes filled with tears. It was the first time in months that someone saw her without judgment. The first few days, everything felt strange. The silence of the night, the chirping of crickets, the smell of wet earth after the rain. But little by little, she began to see the beauty there, the simplicity of bread baked in a wood-fired oven, the laughter of children running among the trees, the kindness of neighbors offering fresh fruit without expecting anything in return. She started sewing again, first for herself, then for a neighbor's daughter. Soon her talent spread by word of mouth, and a discreet line of ladies quickly formed, requesting dresses, alterations, and baby clothes. Sewing became more than a livelihood. It was her way of breathing. Her belly grew, and with it, her courage. Isabella would talk to the baby aloud in the afternoons while embroidering. "We're going to be happy here, my love, without luxuries, without parties, but with truth." Whenever nostalgia or fear touched her, she would walk to the viewpoint behind the church and stand there, watching the sunset. It was the only time of day she allowed herself to cry. The locals began to know her as the girl with golden hands. They never asked about the baby's father, as if intuiting that part of the story wasn't theirs to know. And precisely because of that, Isabella began to feel accepted. For the first time since the abandonment, she felt at home. She bought a used sewing machine with the money from her first orders. She wrote a sign by hand, "Stitches with Love, Isabella," and hung it at the entrance of her house. It was simple, modest, but it was hers. There, among fabrics and silences, she quietly rebuilt herself. At night, before sleeping, she would whisper, "May he be well. May he never have to know. But may someday, if he knows, he regret it with all his heart." And then she would caress her belly and tell her child, "You will be my greatest work, my most perfect stitch." Threads of resilience. Isabella's hands, once accustomed to the soft touch of love letters and promises lost to time, now busied themselves with needles, fabrics, and colorful threads. There was something magical in the sound of the old sewing machine, an almost maternal rhythm that cradled the warm afternoons of Harmony Valley. Each stitch was a prayer, each seam an affirmation that her story would not end at an empty altar. She began to create small garments for the baby growing inside her, cotton rompers, blankets embroidered with stars and moons, tiny shoes made from fabric scraps. Although she still didn't know the baby's gender, she sewed with tenderness, like someone embroidering a future with her own hands. It was her way of loving before knowing the face of the one to come. The neighbors, delighted, began to ask her for clothes too. First one, then another. Soon the small room next to the kitchen became an impromptu workshop. She hung fabrics with clothespins on a wire and patterns piled up on the table, next to an old cookie tin that now held buttons and ribbons. Mrs. Elena, the woman who had first hosted her, began to visit every week. She brought anise tea and helped with the more delicate finishes. "Your child will be born surrounded by love, even if he lacks a father," she would say with a sweet smile. And Isabella would respond with a full heart, "He won't lack anything, I promise." The day of delivery arrived with a sudden storm. Lightning cut across the sky like omens, but Isabella felt no fear. Her exhausted body knew what to do. Surrounded by women from the village and Mrs. Elena's expert hands, she brought Julian into the world in her own bed, to the sound of rain and softly whispered prayers. When she heard his first cry, Isabella closed her eyes and smiled, tears streaming down her face. It was a strong, vibrant cry, as if that tiny being was telling the world, "I arrived despite everything." She held him in her arms and said between sobs, "Julian, my little miracle, my answer." The whole village celebrated his birth. They brought milk, bread, fruit, blankets. This child, though fatherless, was born surrounded by affection. And Isabella, for the first time since the abandonment, felt that perhaps destiny had not been so cruel after all. Julian was more than a son. He was redemption, hope, rebirth. In the following days, between feedings and diaper changes, she returned to sewing. Now with Julian in her arms, or asleep in a small basket next to the machine, there was a new light in her eyes, a serenity born from the certainty that, although her story might not have a fairy tale ending, it could still be beautiful. Isabella hung a new sign at the workshop entrance, handmade with paint and affection. "Julian and Mom, stitches with stories." Indeed, every garment there had a story, of pain, of overcoming, of unconditional love. Because sometimes true love is born when least expected and bears the name of a child. The unsent letters. The first letters began as an impulse. It was early morning. Julian had just fallen asleep, and the silence of the house was almost unbearable. Isabella lit a candle, took an old notebook, and wrote at the top of the page, "Dear Daniel." The words poured out like a release, a bleeding of the soul. She didn't think about what she was going to write. She simply let her heart guide the pen. Would you know your son was born on a rainy night? That he has your eyes and your jawline? Would you know he cries softly, just like you cried when we watched old movies together? Would you know he smiles when he hears my heart? She wrote with rage, love, nostalgia, and pain mixed into a single letter. Isabella had no intention of sending any of these messages. She kept them all inside a wooden box that Julian, curious, called Mommy's treasure chest. To him, it was just another object in the room. To her, it was a tomb where she buried words that would never be spoken aloud. Over time, writing became a habit. When Julian took his first steps, when he first said "Mommy," when he got sick for the first time, and she spent the night awake, afraid of losing him, every important moment was recorded in a letter, as if Daniel were still there, invisible, somewhere in the world, reading everything with the same eyes that once told her, "I love you." Some letters were harsh, full of rage and resentment. "You killed me alive, Daniel. You silenced me. You threw me into the world as if I were disposable. Never say you loved me again." Others, however, were tender and soft. "I wish you could see how Julian hugs books, how he sings softly to the flowers. You would have fallen in love with him in a second." Isabella knew those words would never reach him, and perhaps it was better that way. Because, if she sent them, she would have to admit that, somewhere hidden within herself, she still hoped for an answer, an apology, an impossible return. And she no longer wanted to live in hope. She wanted to live in the presence of her son. Even so, she kept writing. It was her way of organizing her feelings, of naming what still hurt, what had been torn away without explanation. And as Julian grew, the tone of her writing changed more. It was no longer just pain. It was also admiration, pride, multiplied love. There was one particular letter she wrote after Julian asked, "Mommy, why don't I have a daddy?" That night, Isabella cried as she hadn't cried in a long time. And she wrote, "I don't know how to explain what you deserve to know, Julian. I can only tell you that you are enough. You are everything I needed. And the love I give you is love for two." Deep down, she kept that chest full of letters because she wanted to give them to Julian someday. Not so he would hate his father, but so he would know the truth. So he would understand that he was loved from the first second, even if only by one of them. And then, she kept another folded sheet tied with a blue ribbon. One more letter that would never be sent, another piece of her soul handwritten, a fortress of love. Time in Harmony Valley was marked by sweet routines full of affection. In the mornings, Julian ran barefoot through the narrow hallways of the house, his hair tousled. Isabella affectionately called him "my ray of sunshine" as she prepared coffee with hot chocolate and buttered bread. These were ordinary moments, but for her, each small gesture contained a universe of meaning. She raised Julian with a delicate firmness. She taught him to say thank you and excuse me, I'm sorry, not as rules, but as part of a kind soul. On Sundays, they would sit together under the fig tree in the yard to read stories. Isabella mixed classic tales with memories of her own childhood. And sometimes, she would invent an absent figure, a kind imaginary daddy, who traveled far away, but loved you as much as the sky. Julian listened with shining eyes. He never asked many questions. Perhaps, by instinct, he felt that the topic hurt his mom. One night he asked, "When is he coming back?" Isabella smiled sadly and replied, "He sees you every night from the stars. He watches over you from afar." Julian, satisfied, pointed to the sky and said, "Then he saw that I drew a lion today." Between shared laughter and tears, Isabella and Julian built a fortress of love. He helped her fold fabrics in the workshop, carrying scraps as if he were a proud worker. She taught him how to tie knots, how to plant seeds in the yard, and how to bake cookies, although half the dough always ended up on the floor or in his hair. There were difficult days, like the day Julian fell and scraped his knee, and she had to comfort him with kisses and promises of superpowers, or the day he got sick with a high fever, and Isabella spent the night awake, praying for his recovery. And when he recovered, she cried with relief in the bathroom, clutching a towel. But there were also days of impromptu celebration, birthdays with homemade cakes, dances in the living room to old music, afternoons of painting on cardboard spread across the floor. Julian would say his mom was the best artist in the world, and Isabella would reply that he was her greatest masterpiece. Deep down, she knew that someday he would ask harder questions, that the world might not be so kind. But as long as she could, she would create a universe where Julian knew he was loved, cherished, chosen, not out of obligation, but out of desire. From a love that was born before him and grew with him, Isabella never spoke Daniel's name. Never. When she wrote letters at night, she still poured out her heart, but in front of her son, she had decided that the past would not steal the present. The father's absence was real, but the love between the two of them filled that space with a density that nothing else could achieve. And so the days passed, with Julian running among fabric scraps and dreams, and Isabella silently observing the beauty of something she herself had built, a home made of courage, affection, and small daily victories. And if sometimes her heart ached, she would look at her son and remember that when love is true, it is enough. A familiar shadow. It was a softly warm afternoon when Mrs. Elena appeared at the door with an envelope in her hands, and eyes lit up with news. Isabella, I know a young woman who works in a bridal gown shop in the capital, and they're looking for a talented seamstress. I sent her some photos of your work. She was delighted. Isabella stopped what she was doing, her heart quickening, as if something ancient stirred within her. Wedding dresses, of all things? She thanked Mrs. Elena with a faint smile, feigning enthusiasm. But when she was alone, she sat with Julian in her arms and cried in silence. The memory of the empty altar, of the dress she never wore, of the music that never played, all returned like icy waves. Working with wedding dresses? It was like plunging back into the very place where her pain was born. For days she hesitated, staring at the envelope, rereading the proposal, talking to herself in her thoughts. It's just work. It's your talent, and it's an opportunity. But her heart felt heavy. She felt she was betraying herself by considering returning to that world, the world from which she had been brutally expelled. It was Julian who unknowingly gave her the answer. One afternoon, as she was sketching children's clothing designs, he pointed and said, "Mommy, you make princess clothes." Isabella laughed, but the phrase lingered. Perhaps she could transform wedding dresses not into memories of a tragedy, but into symbols of a new beginning. Perhaps she could be the seamstress who helped other women live what she couldn't. She took a deep breath, called the shop, and accepted the temporary job. 3 days a week, with the possibility of extension. Julian would stay with Mrs. Elena, who gladly offered to care for him. "Go on, my dear," Mrs. Elena said. "This is your time." And for the first time in years, Isabella packed her bags with a strange mixture of hope and fear. The shop, called Love's Charms, was refined but welcoming. The owner, Rebecca, was young, kind, and absolutely enchanted with Isabella's talent. "You have magic hands. You don't just sew fabric, you sew emotion." The atmosphere was new, vibrant, filled with anxious brides, demanding mothers, and dreams embroidered in lace. For the first few days, Isabella could barely look at the mirrors. Every time she saw a bride trying on a dress, she felt a knot in her chest. She remembered her own dress, stored in a box at the back of her closet, untouched, forgotten. But little by little, something changed. She began to see each client as an opportunity to rebuild not only their dreams but also her own. And then came the recognition. In a few weeks, her creations began to stand out. An important client praised her on social media, and Rebecca offered her a private room within the shop to create exclusive designs. Isabella almost refused, but she thought of Julian, of the life she wanted to build for them both, and she accepted. At night, back in the village, she would tell her son about her new job. "Today I made a dress full of flowers, like the ones in our garden." Julian listened attentively and asked, "Do princesses cry, Mommy?" She smiled and replied, "Sometimes they do, but even if they cry, they're still princesses." And in that instant, she realized that she too was becoming something new, a woman who rebuilt herself, stitch by stitch. A chance encounter. The afternoon was falling gray over the city, and the fine rain washed the sidewalks with an almost melancholic rhythm. Isabella had left the shop early with a light blue umbrella in her hand, and Julian was jumping in puddles with his yellow boots. They both laughed at some silly thing, perhaps at the way the water splashed their pants, perhaps at the funny noise he made with his mouth. It was an ordinary moment, but filled with sincere happiness. At the same time, across the square, Daniel Hayes stepped out of a black car after a business meeting at a nearby hotel. He was there by chance, distracted, trying to escape the tedium that consumed him since he inherited his family's empire. Life, despite the money, felt empty. His expression was that of someone breathing out of habit, not desire. But then something paralyzed him. A laugh, a familiar sound, a sweet tone that cut through the curtain of rain. He turned his head and saw her. There, under the blue umbrella, she was, Isabella. With the same delicate gait, the same posture of a woman who carried the world on her shoulders without losing her lightness. And beside her, a child. A boy of approximately 5 or 6 years old, with dark hair, light brown skin, and eyes that, by God, seemed like mirrors of his own. Time froze. Daniel felt his heart stumble within his chest. The scene before him was surreal, almost cruel. Isabella was smiling. The child was jumping, and at one point, he clutched the edge of her coat and cried, "Mommy!" Then she knelt, kissed his forehead, and continued walking, never noticing the gaze fixed on her from across the square. He couldn't move. His hands trembled. His face lost all color. A strange sensation invaded his body. It wasn't just surprise. It was guilt. It was pain. It was a belated epiphany. That child couldn't be a coincidence. The age matched. The features, too. And something inside Daniel screamed furiously, "It's your son!" For an instant he thought of running towards them, calling out, asking, shouting, but he didn't have the courage. His throat closed up, and as he sank into a whirlwind of emotions, Isabella disappeared down the narrow street leading to the subway station, laughing with Julian as if it were the simplest and happiest day in the world. Daniel remained there, soaked, motionless. The rain mingled with the tears he could no longer hold back. He didn't know if it was joy, if it was shock, or if it was raw regret. But he knew that something irreversible had happened in that instant, something that would change everything. Because now he had seen them, and he could no longer pretend he didn't know. He had left her at the altar, and now, years later, life put him back in front of her, not with flowers or with forgiveness, but with a child in her arms. The unmistakable truth. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The image of the square replayed like a cruel film in his mind. Isabella smiling, the child calling her mommy, his eyes, those eyes. He knew that gaze. It was the same one he saw every morning in the mirror when he was still just a boy trying to understand the world. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't just be a similar child. There was something visceral about that moment that he couldn't shake off. The next day, he returned to the square. He waited for hours, observing every person who passed. He discreetly asked a florist if she knew a dark-haired woman with long hair and a child with dark eyes. She smiled and replied, "Oh yes, the seamstress. She works over there at the bridal shop. Very nice lady. Her little boy is charming." That tightened his stomach. He went to the shop, stood across the street, peering through the window. There was Isabella, her hair tied back in a messy bun, concentrating on the details of a lace dress. She had a serene expression. She looked like a different woman, more mature, stronger. He didn't have the courage to go in. Not yet. He decided to investigate discreetly. He paid a private detective, someone he trusted and used for corporate matters. "I need information about this woman. Name, address, if she has children, everything, please." In a few days, the report arrived, and the first line Aztumamas almost made him fall off his chair. Isabella Thorne, single, mother of a boy named Julian Thorne, born October 12th, 6 years ago. Daniel didn't know whether to cry or scream. The date was exactly 1 month after the day he left her at the altar. He stood up, went to the window, and stared at the horizon, seeing nothing. The guilt, which had once been a shadow, now had a name, a face, and a voice. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had abandoned a son. The detective had even included photos. Julian in his mother's arms. Julian playing in the square. Julian entering the neighborhood's public school. In every image, Daniel noticed small details that confirmed his intuition. The way he walked, how he tilted his head when he laughed, even the way he frowned. It was him in miniature. And along with the certainty came the weight. An overwhelming weight. Everything he had missed. The first steps, the first words, the birthdays, the sound of his own son's laughter. Daniel felt like the most miserable man in the world. And worst of all, he felt he had no right to ask for forgiveness. Still, he needed to see him up close, to know more. The next day, he parked discreetly near Julian's school. He watched from a distance when Isabella dropped him off at the door. The boy turned, kissed her cheek, and waved his little hand. Daniel almost collapsed right there. That night, sitting on the sofa in the cold, empty penthouse where he lived, he took a blank sheet of paper and wrote, "Dear Julian, I am your father, but I don't know if I deserve for you to call me that." But he didn't have the courage to continue or to sign. He knew he would soon have to face what he had left behind. And for the first time, he desperately wished he had acted differently. A father's plea. Isabella was leaving the shop at the end of the afternoon, exhausted, but with her soul at peace. She had finished a complicated dress and was thinking about how to surprise Julian with a small cake from the bakery next door. But as she crossed the street, she saw a figure standing in the shadow of a tree. Her heart skipped a beat. Her eyes did not lie. It was Daniel. For a second, she thought she was imagining him. But then he took a step forward, hesitantly, and everything inside her screamed. Her whole body froze, and the past exploded in front of her like a storm held back for years. He was there, after 6 years, with the same eyes that once promised her the world, and then left her stranded at the altar, as if she were nothing. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, not knowing what to say. He didn't speak at first either. He just looked at her like someone seeing a ghost, or perhaps a living dead. Finally, he murmured, his voice broken. "He's my son, isn't he?" The question was direct, raw, unvarnished. Isabella felt a heat rise to her cheeks. Her eyes welled up, but not with tenderness, with rage, with pain, with everything she had swallowed in silence for years. She didn't answer immediately. She just crossed her arms and took a deep breath. "Do you really have the nerve to ask that after everything? Please, Isabella, I need to know." She let out a bitter, pained laugh. "You want to know now? After leaving me dressed as a bride, pregnant, alone, expelled by your family, you want to know now, when he's already learned to walk, to talk, to live without you?" The words came out like sharp arrows, but each one came from a real place, a wounded heart. "I didn't know." Daniel tried to justify himself, but his voice failed him. "If I had known, if you had told me." "You disappeared," she cried, not caring about the glances of passers-by. "You gave me no choice. You never looked for me. You never sent a letter or anything. You erased me from your life as if I had never existed." And then, in a cutting whisper, "Yes, Daniel, he is your son. Julian is yours. But you were never his father." He felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under his feet. Her words struck hard, but there was no lie in them. And that hurt more than any reproach. His gaze lowered, his shoulders slumped, as if carrying the weight of 6 years of abandonment. "Forgive me," he said, almost voiceless. Isabella just shook her head, holding back the tears that insisted on falling. "Don't ask me for that. Forgiveness isn't asked for like that, Daniel. Forgiveness is built. It's earned. And you are very far from that." And without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away. She didn't run. She walked with determination, because even though her heart was broken, she was no longer the woman he abandoned. She was a mother, a warrior, and now it was she who decided when and if he would have a place in their lives again. Seeds of truth days passed since the confrontation. Isabella tried to continue her routine as if nothing had happened. But Daniel's presence, the brutal revelation, the reunion, everything reverberated within her like a tireless echo. Julian noticed something different in the air. "Mommy, are you sad?" he asked one night as he snuggled into her lap. She didn't answer. She just hugged him tighter. Daniel, for his part, also found no peace. Isabella's face haunted him. Her wounded gaze, her sharp words, the confirmation of his paternity, it all corroded him from within. And above all, the fear that it was now too late. But he knew he owed her at least the truth, not to ask for forgiveness, but to honor what once united them, and perhaps to give Julian the whole story. He arranged a meeting with Isabella through Chloe, who still kept in touch with him. Isabella hesitated, but something within her, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the need to close a chapter, led her to accept. They met in a discreet cafe, away from the center. She arrived with her back straight, but her eyes cautious. "I'm not here for myself, Daniel. I'm here for Julian. He has a right to know who you were and who you chose not to be." He flinched, visibly affected. He was no longer the arrogant man who left her at the altar. He seemed smaller, more human, also wounded. Daniel held his cup with trembling hands and began without lifting his gaze. "The day of our wedding, I received a call from my father. He found out everything about your family, your parents, your finances. He told me that if I married you, he would destroy them, literally. He would buy your father's debts, take away their house, close any job opportunities you might have. He was capable of that. I knew it." Isabella remained silent, just pressing her lips together, trying to process. Daniel continued. I wanted to tell you. I swear I wanted to. But I froze. He spoke with a coldness that chilled me. He said you would just be another victim of our world, and I couldn't bear the idea of seeing you suffer because of me. So I ran, cowardly, like a weak child. She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears but firm. You left me without even giving me a chance to fight with you. You took away my right to choose. You preferred to protect me with a wound. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. And still, he destroyed us anyway, only from the inside. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't know about the pregnancy. If I had known, I would have come back. I swear, Isabella. God, I would have done everything differently. Everything. He covered his face with his hands. You have no idea how many times I've regretted it. But it was too late. And the more time passed, the more cowardly he became. She closed her eyes for an instant, like someone holding back a river about to overflow. Then she took a deep breath. Thank you for telling the truth. But understand this. It doesn't matter what your father said. What broke me wasn't his absence. It was yours. It was your silence, your decision to disappear. She stood up slowly. Now you know you have a son. What you do with that is your business. But if you want to be part of his life, you're going to have to start from the bottom, because that's where I started over. Daniel watched her walk away with firm steps and a straight back. A transformed woman. And he, sitting there, was left with his heart in pieces. Because he finally understood. Protecting someone is not the same as abandoning them. Forgiveness and hope. The days that followed the reunion were confusing for Isabella. There was a new weight in the air, not one of doubt, but of a truth revealed too late. Now she knew why Daniel had abandoned her. She knew of the threat, the blackmail, the pressure from his father. But none of that erased the 6 years of silence. The birthdays spent alone. The nights when Julian had a fever and she prayed, afraid of losing him. The abandonment, however justified, was still abandonment. Daniel tried to get closer. He appeared in the village with gifts, letters, pleas. He knocked on her door, and Julian, not knowing who he was, looked at him with curiosity. Are you Mommy's friend? Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to say, I'm your daddy, but he didn't have the courage. Isabella appeared at the door with a hard gaze. Go away. You have no place here. Isabella, please, he tried to argue. I'm not asking you to forgive me now, but let me get to know him, just that. She let out a bitter laugh. You want easy access to something I fought to keep alive? You want to skip the years you weren't here? But life doesn't work that way. She continued in a voice firmer than ever. You didn't trust me. You took me out of a decision that was ours. You preferred to erase me rather than fight by my side. That's not love, Daniel. That's cowardice disguised as sacrifice. The sharp words fell on him like acid rain, and he couldn't contradict them, because they were true. Daniel persisted for days. He sent messages, waited for her outside the shop, spoke with Chloe. All in vain. Isabella blocked him, avoided him, and no matter how much her chest ached seeing him with his head down, she didn't give in. Because it still hurt, and because she had learned to survive without him. One silent night, sitting on the edge of her bed, she talked with Mrs. Elena. Why did he come back now? Why does fate do these things? The old woman, in a serene voice, replied, because sometimes true love doesn't arrive at the right time, but that doesn't mean we have to accept it just because it knocked on the door. Isabella understood that she still loved Daniel, but she didn't trust him. And where there is no trust, love suffocates and dies. She was not willing to lose herself again for someone who left her stranded. Not for now. Not while the wounds were still open and bleeding. One day, Julian found one of the gifts Daniel had left, a wooden car carved with his name on the side. "Who made this, Mommy?" She hesitated. She knelt in front of him and replied with a tight heart. "Someone who is trying to fix what he broke. But sometimes, not everyone deserves a second chance." And then she put the gift in a box, as if to say, "Not yet. Maybe someday. But not yet." Daniel knew he couldn't force anything. Isabella had been clear, and Julian was just a child. Still, something inside him told him he had to try. Not as a hero returning to the story, but as a repentant man, trying to start anew from the only possible place, the love of a son he hadn't known. In the following days, he discreetly began visiting the square where he knew Julian often played. He brought books, wooden cars made by local artisans, small cloth dolls with superhero capes. He didn't approach directly. He left the gifts on a bench, with notes simply signed, "A friend." Julian noticed the gifts, but wasn't enthusiastic. He would ask his mom, who would reply evasively, "Perhaps someone wants to see you smile, my love." The boy would play for a while, but then would leave the toys and go back to climbing trees or drawing in his notebooks. Isabella watched everything from afar, in silence. One afternoon, Daniel mustered his courage. He waited until Julian was alone with his dog, Buster, and approached carefully. He sat beside him and offered a pack of dinosaur stickers. "Do you like these, champ?" Julian looked at him suspiciously. He frowned, as if something inside him warned of a stranger's presence. "My mom says I shouldn't talk to strangers," he said seriously, hugging Buster tightly. The phrase, though simple, hit Daniel like a direct blow to the chest. "You're right, smart kids do that. But can I leave these for you anyway?" Julian hesitated, took the pack cautiously, and murmured, "Thanks." Then he turned away, like someone building an invisible wall. Daniel understood that he couldn't rush what had been broken even before it was born. But he couldn't give up either. He returned the following week with an adventure book. He sat on the same bench. Julian watched him from afar. He didn't approach, but he didn't leave either. Little by little, the child began to tolerate the presence of that mysterious man. But he didn't smile. He didn't ask his name. It was as if to say, "I'm here, but you still have no place." Isabella, seeing everything from the shop terrace, felt a tightness in her chest. She knew Daniel was trying, and she saw that Julian wasn't cruel, just cautious. His childlike instinct protected him. He sensed there was something there, something unsaid. But how could he trust a face that was never at his birthdays? That didn't hold his hand when he had a fever? That didn't hug him when he fell off his bike for the first time? One night, as she tucked him into bed, Julian asked, "Mommy, why does that man give me things?" She swallowed. "Because he wants you to know he cares about you. Sometimes it takes a while for someone to arrive, but they do." The boy thought for a moment and said, "He looks sad." Isabella caressed his hair and replied, "Perhaps he is." The next day, Daniel brought a paper airplane with the words, "If you ever want to fly with me, I'll be down here." Julian looked at it, read it with difficulty, and put it in his pocket. He didn't smile, but he didn't return it either. And in that simple gesture, Daniel understood. Perhaps that was where the first, tenuous, silent thread of a bridge began, between two hearts separated by time. The unspoken truth. Isabella spent days with a restless heart. Every time she saw Julian observe Daniel from a distance, something inside her twisted. He deserved to know. It wasn't fair to keep feeding him half-truths. Her son was intelligent, sensitive, and increasingly curious. It was time to reveal what had remained hidden for so long. That night, after dinner, she called him to the terrace. Julian brought a blanket and snuggled up beside her, as he always did when he wanted to hear stories. The sky was clear, full of stars. Isabella took a deep breath. "Can I tell you something important today?" The boy nodded, his eyes wide with attention. "Do you remember the man who leaves you gifts in the square?" He replied immediately. "Yes, the one with the dinosaur book." She smiled sadly. "Well, he's not just a friend. He's your daddy, Julian." The phrase fell into the air like a heavy sigh. The boy frowned, trying to understand. "My daddy? But I thought my daddy lived in the stars." Isabella nodded, her eyes burning. "Is that what I told you when you were little? Because I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to grow up happy, without waiting for someone who was never here." Julian remained silent, looking at the sky. Then he asked, "Did he leave me?" Isabella hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to fill her son's heart with resentments that didn't belong to him. He made a mistake, a very big mistake, and for a long time he was afraid to come back. But now he's trying to fix it. The boy remained thoughtful. "Is that why he gives me things?" She nodded. "He's trying to get to know you. He's learning to be a daddy." There was a long pause. Julian rested his head on his mother's shoulder. "I don't know if I like him, but he looks sad." Isabella laughed sadly. "He is sad, and rightly so, because he missed many years with you, years that no one can give him back." Julian looked up, confused. "And now what do I do?" Isabella caressed his hair tenderly. "You don't have to do anything now, my love. Just feel. When you're ready, you can talk to him. Or not. You decide." The boy nodded, still processing everything. "But he really is my daddy?" Isabella pulled out an old photo from her pocket, one of the few she had of the two of them smiling. "Yes, he was very important to me. And now, he can be important to you too." Julian took the photo carefully. He stared at it for a while. Then he placed it on his lap. "If he asks me if I want to play, can I say yes?" Isabella smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "Of course you can. And you can also say no. Just do what your heart tells you." That night, Julian slept with the photo beside his bed, and Isabella, alone in the kitchen, cried in silence. She cried for everything that was, for what wasn't, and for everything that could still be. Because even though the past was full of scars, the present gave signs that perhaps there was still a path. Mending the fabric. In the days that followed the conversation with his mother, Julian looked at Daniel with different eyes. There was still caution, but there was also a spark of curiosity, a discreet desire to know more about this man, who until then was just a stranger, who liked books and paper airplanes. The first approach happened by chance. Julian was trying to put together a complicated puzzle on a park bench, frustrated because he couldn't make it fit. Daniel, passing by, saw the boy huffing and approached carefully. "This one here goes in backward," he said, pointing to a piece. Julian hesitated, but handed him the piece, and together they fitted it. They said nothing more, but they stayed there, side by side, until the last piece. The next day, Daniel brought a book with illustrations of constellations. "Your mom told me you like stars," he said softly. Julian took the book and leafed through it. "I know where Orion is." Daniel smiled, surprised. "Really? Show me." And right there, on the park ground, Julian drew an imaginary constellation in the sky with his fingers. Little by little, their encounters became more natural. Daniel didn't force anything. He just appeared, sat nearby, and waited for Julian to call him. When that happened, he would join him gently, respecting the child's pace. And Julian, for his part, began to look forward to those encounters. Although he didn't say it aloud, his eyes betrayed him. One day, Isabella watched them from afar and saw something that made her cry silently. Julian, running with a wooden airplane in his hands while Daniel laughed and chased him. The scene was so simple, so real, that it seemed to be from a future she never believed in. For the first time, she thought, perhaps my son will indeed come to know a father's love, even if it's late. Daniel, for his part, rediscovered the world alongside Julian. He laughed as he hadn't laughed in a long time. He learned to listen, to stoop to a child's height, to see beauty in dry leaves, in ants in a line, in the clumsy way the child drew. He discovered that being a father wasn't about saying, "I love you." It was about being there, even when the other didn't know what to feel. On one of those afternoons, Julian took Daniel's hand and led him to a tree. "This is my secret tree. Only Mommy and I know about it." Daniel stopped, moved. "Can I be part of that secret?" Julian thought for a second, then nodded. "Yes, you can, but promise me you'll never cut it down." And then, with the tip of a small branch, he carved J+D into the trunk. Daniel treasured that moment. It was the first time he felt part of something. And although the path with Isabella was still long, that J+D on the trunk was proof that, with patience and truth, blood ties could transform into ties of love. That night, as he put away the star book, Julian told his mother, "He's not as weird as I thought." Isabella smiled, caressing his hair. Sometimes, the heart takes a while to recognize someone, even if that person has been here for a long time. And there, under the faint light of the bedside lamp, the threads finally began to mend. A father's legacy. The call came on a cloudy morning. Daniel answered, not imagining that on the other end of the line he would hear what he hadn't expected so soon. "Your father didn't make it. He passed away during the night." The silence that followed was strange. It wasn't exactly pain. It was a mixture of emptiness and a bitter relief, difficult to explain. The man who had molded him with iron and fear was gone, and with him, perhaps, some of the shadows that still pursued him. At the wake, Daniel remained discreet. The presence of the family executives, political friends, allied businessmen, filled the atmosphere with an almost suffocating formality. But inside him, there was only an orphaned child, not of physical presence, but of love. Orphaned of a father who never hugged him, who only knew how to demand. It was Martha, the lifelong housekeeper, who handed him the letter. "He wrote this for you. He asked me to give it to you only after his passing." Daniel hesitated as he received the envelope. His name was written in his father's rigid, impeccable handwriting. It was strange to hold that paper, like holding a ghost. He waited until he was alone to open it. He sat in the library, where he had been reprimanded so many times, and broke the seal. The letter began cold, like everything his father did. But as the words unfolded, something unexpected emerged. Regret. "I was too hard a man, an absent father, and with you, I made the worst of mistakes." He confessed everything, that he had had Isabella investigated, that he knew about the pregnancy before Daniel himself, that he used that information as a threat, that he lied, saying she would betray him, that she would destroy the family name. "I feared her not for what you were, but for what she awakened in you, that you were more of a man with her, and that terrified me. I couldn't bear to lose control." Daniel cried in silence. He felt rage, pain, shame, but also a cruel relief. Finally, the pieces fit. He wasn't crazy. He hadn't been weak alone. There had been a trap, and he fell into it, destroying everything he loved. The letter ended with a phrase that was etched into his soul. "If you still have time, rebuild what I broke. Love what I never knew how to love. Be the father I never knew how to be to you." It was, at last, the last plea of a man who only knew how to say "I love you" with orders and threats. Daniel put the letter away as if it were a trophy of pain. And that same day, he got in his car and drove to Harmony Valley. He stopped in front of Isabella's house. She opened the door, surprised, and saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was liberation. It was a man who finally knew who he was. He handed her the letter with trembling hands. "You have to read this. It's about you. About us." Isabella read in silence, and when she finished, tears fell without her realizing it. Finally, she just said, "Now I understand. But that doesn't erase everything. It only explains it." Daniel nodded. "I don't want to erase. I want to build something new, with respect, with truth, for me, for you, and for Julian." And for a brief moment between the two, the past seemed to bow, leaving space for something new to be born. A second stitch. Isabella read the letter once more, alone, under the faint light of the living room lamp. Daniel's father's words resonated like a belated plea from destiny, as if the universe, after years of silence, finally revealed the truth she so deserved. But more than the words of that man, it was Daniel's gaze, humble, wounded, and willing, that stayed in her mind. For days she reflected. She relived everything: the empty altar, the pregnancy test, Julian's fevers, the nights spent sewing until dawn. But she also thought about the last few months, about Daniel sitting in the square, listening to dinosaur stories, about how Julian began to smile when he saw him, about the way he looked at Julian, like a father who had rediscovered his soul in a small body. Isabella was not naive. She knew that forgiveness didn't come with a reset button. It was a process, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer the young woman who waited for flowers and promises. She was a woman who knew the weight of life, and in that weight, she understood. To forgive is not to forget. It is to free oneself. It was on a serene afternoon when she decided to take the first step. She invited Daniel to dinner at her house. Nothing formal. Rice, beans, and chicken broth, Julian's favorite dish. When he arrived, with empty hands and eyes full of respect, she knew she had made the right decision. During dinner, the three laughed together. Julian told silly jokes. Daniel praised the food, as if it were from an elegant restaurant. And Isabella watched them in silence, trying to preserve that moment like someone guarding a relic in her chest. An instant of peace, a glimmer of what could be. After putting the child to bed, they both stayed on the terrace. The starry sky seemed to bless the night. Daniel broke the silence. "I don't expect you to love me again, but I want you to know that I still love you, and that, above all, I love what we built without knowing it. Our son he's my chance to be someone better." Isabella looked at him with serenity. "I don't forgive for you, Daniel. I forgive for me, because I deserve to move forward without carrying that weight. And I forgive for Julian, who deserves to see that love can be rebuilt, even on ruins." Then she took his hand calmly, without rushing. "But what comes next, only time will tell. I don't want you as a fantasy. I want you whole, present if you're going to stay." Daniel squeezed her hand firmly, his eyes moist. "Then I'll stay with everything I am, with what I failed at, and with everything I still want to do, right. For you." That night, for the first time in 6 years, Isabella slept with her heart at peace. Not because she had returned to the past, but because she was finally ready for the future. A new beginning, under the rain. The church was decorated with simplicity and poetry. Sunflowers, lavender, and daisies filled the altar like a silent homage to the time that had passed, and to the pains that blossomed into strength. Daniel had organized everything in secret, with the help of Chloe and the women of Harmony Valley. The place was the same, the time too. But this time, the spirit was different. The rain began to fall early, fine, subtle, like a blessing from heaven. People began to arrive with colorful umbrellas, and the air filled with excited murmurs. Many there knew the story. They knew of the fall, of the rebuilding, of forgiveness earned tear by tear. And because of that, every gesture held more weight, more beauty. Daniel, standing before the altar, wore a light gray suit, his hair damp from the drizzle, his eyes shining not with fear, but with reverence. He looked towards the main door, his heart pounding as if it were the first time. Only now he understood the value of every second, of every decision. And then she appeared. Isabella walked with firm, gentle steps, in a simple white linen dress, flowing like water. Her loose hair danced with the light breeze. Beside her, Julian, in a little suit and shoes that clacked as he walked, carried the rings in a small wooden box. Arriving in front of Daniel, Isabella stopped, looked at him as one looks at someone who has traversed darkness and reached the other side. In a low voice, but full of certainty, she said, "Now, yes." He smiled, his eyes moist, and there, without needing to say more, they sealed a new beginning. The ceremony was brief, but full of meaning. The pastor, moved, spoke of faith, of time, and of how some loves only bloom after being tested by life. When it was time for the rings, Julian walked towards them, serious, proud, and handed over the rings like someone delivering the key to a new future. As they placed the rings on each other's fingers, the rain intensified, but no one ran. On the contrary, they stayed there, laughing, crying, bathed by the water as if they were being baptized by a new life. Daniel took Isabella's hand and said, "I waited for you without knowing it, but you taught me what love is." She smiled, "And you taught me that true love knows how to wait." Leaving the church, the square was covered in puddles and joy. Julian jumped barefoot in the water. People danced in the rain, and the sky, though gray, seemed more illuminated than ever. There were no luxuries or perfection, but there was love. There was presence. There was a future. And that day, what began with abandonment ended in reunion. What was born from pain blossomed into redemption, because some loves don't need to be perfect to be eternal. They just need to withstand the first storm and finally meet under the same rain. What part of Isabella and Daniel's journey resonated most with you? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to our channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will likely move you too. Don't miss it.